My name is Christiana Ochoa, and I'm the dean here at the Maurer School of Law, which is always a great honor to introduce myself that way. Before we get started, I want to just acknowledge the staff that helps us bring this event together. Our IT staff, Paul Stiles is in the back there. I saw Marion Connedy a minute ago, and Chelsea Browning and her team just make these events run so smoothly, and we're so grateful for their efforts to allow us to enjoy these great events. So. It is my great honor to introduce to you this lecture. This is our 2024 William R. Stewart Memorial Lecture for Labor and Employment Law. This lecture was established in 2006 in honor of the late Bill Stewart, who is one of our most distinguished alums. Mr. Stewart was a veteran of the U.S. Army and earned his JD here in 1959. 40 years after graduating, he was inducted to the school's Academy of Law Alumni Fellows. And you can find a picture of him just across the hall from this room on a plaque there, along with our other Academy of Law Alumni Fellows. That recognition is the highest and most distinguished recognition we can bestow on our alums, and Mr. Stewart is one of those fellows. For 34 years, Bill Stewart was a lawyer for the National Labor Relations Board and was the board's first African American chief counsel. His leadership and commitment to excellence prompted Bill Clinton to award him the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service to characterize his to mark his contributions to the NLRB, which he characterized as unparalleled. At that time, he was the first and only NLRB employee in the entire 69-year history to receive this honor, which was the highest honor of any civil servant that any civil servant can receive. The Maurer School of Law's Stewart Lecture series has enabled us to bring some of the most prominent labor and employment scholars in the nation to this room to share their insights, their expertise, and often also their stories of inspiring careers. Those lectures include, there are many more than these, but they include William B. Gould IV from Stanford University, Laura Cooper from the University of Minnesota, Martin Malin from Chicago-Kent College of Law, Matt Finken from the University of Illinois, Sam Bengestos from Michigan Law, Cynthia Estlund from NYU, Susan Sturm from Columbia Law School, and Cornell University's Stuart Schwab. This year, we're very pleased to add to that list of exceptional scholars with the University of San Diego's Professor Orly Lobel, who will be giving this year's Stewart Lecture. At this point, I'll turn the podium over to Professor Ken Dauschmidt, who is the Willard and Margaret Carr Professor of Labor and Employment Law here at the Maurer School of Law. Professor Dauschmidt will provide a more full introduction of Professor Lobel. Thanks, Ken.
Well, I don't often want to interrupt the dean, especially when she's doing so well. But Orly has been a personal friend of mine for many years, so I wanted to give a chance to just give a little bit of a personal introduction. We have seen each other. We've never been on the same faculty, but we've seen each other. We have shared interests in labor and employment law and also the economic analysis of the law. So we have seen each other at conferences over the years. Some of the conferences she helped organize, some of the conferences I helped organize, some of the conferences we just went to meet interesting people. And I think it was actually, we narrowed it down to, I think I recall the lunch where I met her. It was in 2004 at the Law and Societies meetings in Canada. And I was struck by how bright, how creative, and just how pleasant she was as a person. And this was at the very beginning of her academic career, before she even had her first teaching position. And it was a pleasure for me to watch over the years as the rest of the academy kind of discovered how bright and how creative she was, and also how pleasant she is. I mentioned that we were co-authors. It would have been probably about 2007 or something like that, because the book was published in 2009. I invited her to be a co-author on a book appropriately titled Labor and Employment, Law and Economics. And sometimes co-authors are a bit of a mixed blessing. I've had co-authors who will wait until your part is done to make sure that the project is actually going to happen. I've had co-authors who've done less because they know that you want to get the project done, and as a result, you'll pick up the slack. Orly was not like that at all. In fact, we had an author. She was always a pleasure to work with, and we had an author drop out on us at the very last minute on an essential part of the book, and Orly picked it up and wrote it, even though it wasn't in her area of expertise, and she did a terrific job with it. So I've always thought of her in very high regard in that way. Let's see. Hopefully we'll have the chance to work together again in the future, but you'll have to be first author on anything we work. But so I won't postpone this any longer. I'd like to introduce my friend and co-author, Orly Lobel, Professor Orly Lobel, who will give
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Ken. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Deb. You guys have such a wonderful faculty, and I was just delighted to be the Stewart lecturer for this year. And I am very excited that we get to talk about AI and the future of work. Nobody's talking about AI, obviously, and I like to actually start by talking about how personal AI is. Should be working. It worked when they tested it. Okay, I'll just use the clicker. So I like to kind of ask the audience about how personal AI is, because I think it is personal to us, very pervasive. So maybe first question, how many of you are wearing a smartphone? Okay. Actually a majority. Holding or wearing a smartwatch, holding a smartphone. How many of you have a smartphone? Everybody. And then I want to ask you, well, tomorrow, though, you have to drive to Indianapolis, and you are taking out your Uber app or calling a taxi, a limo service, and they offer you a self-driving car. How many of you would get in the back seat and, get into that car with no driver, an autonomous vehicle, driverless car? Okay, so we only have 3 or maybe 5 people. There you go. So this has been typical. I've been talking in the past year about how we think about AI, how we're moving to regulate AI, and we see this very kind of typical moment that we're all in, where AI is all around us. AI is on us, literally. It's in us in some ways. In my book, The Equality Machine, I describe, the first line is, I have 3 daughters. The middle one is bionic, and I describe how we are part of millions of families that have somebody with type 1 diabetes, which means that there is now AI that's attached and really inside one's body, looking at glucose levels and talking autonomously so it's 2 devices, a glucose monitor and an insulin pump, and the FDA just approved a closed loop there. But then there is a lot of fear and hesitation when I talk about or ask you to think about you kind of giving up the wheel, giving up control, and just entering a self-driving car. And I want to tell you that actually, I flew in from California. It's here. It's not something in the future. You can actually get your app and hail a driverless autonomous vehicle. They've been approved in Arizona and other places. So it really is here. And what I want us to talk about is, how can we think about these new technologies in ways that make our lives better, especially our work lives, our employment, law and employment processes better. Very relatedly, how do we think about AI rationally? And as a behavioral researcher, I've been really kind of engaged in looking at some of the irrationalities, or kind of asking people, why are you not, ready for some technology, and why are you ready for others? Is it the correct? Are we fearing the correct things, or the incorrect things? And what is the role of law and policy in all of that? So I want to say that all of these are really connected. And kind of my motivation of talking to especially people in the legal community, but more broadly to to government and to private industry about these issues is to really kind of connect these fields of thinking rationally, being informed about how technology is shaping our lives, and then directing it and harnessing it for good. So specifically about work, I want to suggest to you that in all the processes and kind of all the stages of work, there is potential to introduce machine learning, to introduce algorithmic decision making, to introduce technology, to improve some of the processes that we've been doing for a long time. From expanding the pool of eligible for experienced applicants, that I think is quite intuitive, that the fact that we now can work remotely, that you can find jobs through LinkedIn, has expanded the very narrow word of mouth ways in which closed communities have been hiring. And I want to suggest to you that that expands, that has the potential to very much expand, also on the fronts of diversity, of gender and racial diversity, to increase, who knows about jobs, who applies to jobs, getting through the pipeline of hiring. And I have been thinking a lot about how just the process of who actually applies, not just knows about a job, and who actually applies for a job, and then screening and who actually gets a job. We can use AI to de-bias some of the very biased processes that, again, have been here for a long time. How people get paid, how they're marked or evaluated for performance and for promotion, for retention, and then their ability to then leave and have a more competitive and mobile market, which, as Ken knows, is part of a lot of my other research on talent mobility and labor market competition. I'll say more about that. But just kind of a quick example to begin with. Here's an example that I got excited about at the stage of the pool, pipeline, and screening. There are a lot of these new efforts to look at, even when you know that a job exists, what makes somebody think that they might get it. So from the applicant's perspective, do they apply? And it turns out that when you're using large data sets and you're putting it on, you're using large language models to kind of look to pre-test different ways that ads are drafted, there are things that we can figure out that we didn't know before with the naked eye. So things that I would not have thought of like, does it matter that the ad is drafted with bullet points versus kind of like a full sentences prose? Turns out that those things matter to how diverse the pool is of how they, like, if women decide to apply for those jobs. Again, you wouldn't know this as the applicant that this is impacting you, but there's a lot of research that actually shows that, unconsciously, there's some things that are off-putting. Another example that these systems have been figuring out that maybe is more intuitive, and this goes to kind of the image here, is that when businesses use all sorts of language, terminology that alludes to athletics, like we're looking for the star athlete for our team, or we're looking for a coding ninja to be part of the CS department. Different terms can be, again, off-putting to different groups. And the great thing is that you can actually test these things. The machines are kind of 24/7 can look at ad optimization to make greatest pool be actually comfortable in applying and think that they have a chance to get this job. And lots more examples like that. But what I talked about until now, and I have been researching also pay and using software to kind of detect gender and racial pay gaps across job descriptions, and that's, I think, something that companies should really be adopting, a lot of software that helps you pre-detect these ongoing gaps rather than being sued later and fighting it. But all of that has to do with the process of kind of how we organize work. There's, of course, and it's related, and it might be part of the fears of technology specifically in thinking about work and the future of work. There's, of course, also so much going on with how automation is changing what work is needed. So there's disruption in the labor market in the sense of, will AI replace us? Would a robot take my job, kind of thing? And of course, there too, there's a lot happening. Undeniably, there are in the care and health sector a lot of new applications, both kind of disembodied algorithms that perform things like radiology screening that are outperforming radiologists, human radiologists. There are physical robots that are helping with things like physical therapy and recovery. There are robots introduced in education. So in the Equality Machine in my book, I interview an MIT researcher, Cynthia Brazil, who is one of the first researchers who designed these social robots who, beyond kind of their computational abilities, they actually can mimic human behavior, and using facial and emotional recognition technology, they can actually learn what specifically personalized kind of interactions with a child that is learning math, for example, and turns out that sometimes some kids learn better if the robot is mimicking failure and showing them that they can take risks and do badly, and some others do better if they're like more competitive, and these cute fuzzy social robots are actually being introduced in schools across Boston and are doing really well in helping teachers with the student interactions. And of course, there's so much generative AI happening right now, creating text and music, and so in every sector we can talk. We can unpack so many different questions, whether it's the Hollywood Actors Guild or Writers Guild, or if it's musicians, or if it's computer programmers. What will happen to our jobs? So there's all of that happening. Here's an example, kind of a little-known application that, it's little known, I think, fact. Maybe you've seen this baby seal featured in pop culture, of helping in elderly homes, in care work of specifically of people with Alzheimer's and dementia. The FDA has approved specifically this seal, Paro, to help in the care of these patients. And I was writing the Equality Machine when it was COVID, so I was traveling to Japan remotely and researching what was happening there. And I talk about how the Japanese have been in the frontier of embodied robots, and here it's more about disembodied kind of algorithms. So physical iterations of these machines, but this is actually the creator, Dr. Shibata, of Paro, the inventor of Paro, I got to meet him this past summer in Geneva, where we were at the AI for Good United Nations big summit. So it's been really fascinating to see, these new developments. With generative AI, I was talking about healthcare until now, and ChatGPT 4 is already passing the medical exams, but you law students and law faculty, you've probably seen that it's also passing the bar. So what's happening with, lawyering and law jobs is a big, exciting moment. And it's also passing the GMAT. So everything's happening so fast, right? Anything you want to design, in ChatGPT, actually, images are also, now DALL-E is embedded in ChatGPT 4. So this is me not knowing how to design and draw, just giving ChatGPT a prompt and getting, a nice image within seconds. So there's so much going on. So much promise, so much potential, again, both in the kind of processes of how to manage work, how to recruit and hire and assess, and also in the kind of performing the jobs themselves. And so I just described, a lot of these great potential and benefits and excitement. But of course, we also know that in the public debates, in the conversations that we're having, there's a lot of fear of, what are the risks of AI, and being in kind of the frontiers of studying tech policy itself, the legislation that is before Congress, the executive order that President Biden issued in 2023, and on the other side of the pond, the EU AI Act, and also state legislation. I've been researching how there is a lot of focus on those risks and the problems, the fails of AI. And so even though I started the talk telling you, look, AI can actually, in the context of work, expand the work pool, diversify, debias us in hiring and assessment and pay gaps. We actually, I'm sure, I could get a show of hands, but I'm sure many of you, most of you, all of you have heard about talking about AI as automating inequality, as AI, how do we battle AI bias? What's going to happen with, AI excluding others and, strengthening the powerful? And so there's all of that. And what I set out to do, and I want us to talk about today, is to have a balanced conversation of all of that. Not to deny that there are AI fails and risks, but to think about how to think about it and how to assess where we're going, and to tell you that, first of all, I think this is at this point obvious that the train has left the station, in the sense that we are, if you look at Fortune 500 companies, the vast majority are using AI in their resume parsing and in all sorts of processes about work. The nature of technology, to mix metaphors, is that you don't put the genie back in the bottle. And also, this genie is not, one genie. AI is many, many different things. There are the simple algorithms that are really formulas of just, these 5 factors. We've used to do them by just, inputting them. Now the AI is doing it. The algorithm is helping us do this, to these generative large language models that are really detecting patterns that we can't figure out as humans. And so we need to think about, how it's here. And I want to suggest today that we have at least, and today I think I'm going to talk about 6 different ways in which we I think everybody, and I'm especially interested in policymakers and the way that we think about the laws that we are proposing and adopting, courts and how they think about the legality of different automated processes. There are ways in which we've been failing in how we think about AI. So I'm not even talking in one of the fallacy, like this overarching fear that I think, I kind of document in my research that we've always had of this idea that machines will rise up and become sentient and rise up against us. And I think when you actually talk to people in the computer science world, we're very far from that. And what I want to say is that it's not that we shouldn't think about that improbable risk and not here, question of whether that's, we're moving to like losing control over AI. But I also think that it's a distraction from thinking about how to regulate and how to think about what we do have now. So what we do have now, let's go back to the 5 people that raised their hand and being willing to get into a self-driving car, and actually looking at the rest of you who are not comfortable yet. Let's think about what do you want to know in order to give up the wheel, the control, right? And what I do in really every sector that I kind of turn to in the research of how we're thinking about approving different and deploying different systems that we now have, whether it's radiology and healthcare, bot replacing a doctor. It's a software system that does resume parsing versus an HR person that's doing an interview of a job candidate, or a driver, a trucker. What I've found is that very often we have this double standard where we expect perfection from an automated system, whereas we kind of accept much more the biases and the fails and the inconsistencies that humans have. And so very, very importantly, we always need to remember the comparative advantage question. So the question is not, have you heard of an Uber that got into an accident that was a self-driving car in Arizona once, and you're like, I'm never getting into that Uber that's without a driver. The question is, let's look empirically, is it safer? That's always the question. And very similarly, and I document this in a lot of these questions about hiring and work processes, we have to ask, is it doing better than the systems that we had before that we know? I mentioned that some of my research has been about pay gaps, and it's been very frustrating as a scholar who looks at closing the gender and racial pay gaps, how stagnant it has become. We kind of stayed on the 80 cents to the dollar for a long, long time, and if you look statistically, the statistics are kind of, economists were quite in the consensus that we are going to stay there for the next century, basically, if we don't do something different. So, we need to do something different. There is a lot of opportunity, but we need to ask, again, not if we're adopting a perfect system, but if we're adopting a better system that we had before. Similarly, I get very frustrated when I see this kind of reference to a past fail of an automated system, or a concept of a system. It's not the same system anymore, and not recognizing that by definition machine learns. Machine learning is, by definition there's an improvement there. We know the sources of some of the fails, and I'll give you an example from employment. The same story of, again, probably a show of hands if you've heard it, I'll ask you later, the Amazon fail of doing a resume sorting app. I see nods. I just noticed John Oliver a few months ago did an AI segment of how AI is biased, and he gave that example again, where Amazon 10 years ago tried to do a resume sorting app, and it turned out that only white men named Jared got hired. Oh no, let's throw out AI, AI can't be deployed for, well, it turns out that, Amazon never deployed that technology because, unlike humans, actually we can kind of see the biases up front, we can audit them, and we can improve them. We can actually pivot and do that, here there was a very clear explanation of why this was a bad way to design an automated system, which is just look at what we've done in the past and replicate that. So you're feeding the algorithm bad skewed data versus telling the algorithm now, look for undervalued talent. Now the gold standard is having two algorithms, actually. One that's doing outputs of recommended resumes, and the second is that's constantly checking for diversity across identities. So really kind of recognizing that there's been improvement. And again, I get really frustrated with this because this is not just not just John Oliver. I've gone through FTC reports that point to past failures and not really recognizing that that's not where the science is at this point. Another one that I think is very irresponsible when we do this. I'll give you an example from healthcare that I gave you already. Should we deploy, or should the FDA approve a bot radiologist for mammograms? It's another research that I look at, and I interview the researcher who was pioneering this area in the equality machine, where it actually is now being deployed in some hospitals, but you see governments, you see decision makers in the healthcare industry saying, well, but if you take the two best, most qualified radiologists in the region and you give them this mammogram versus the bot radiology, then still they're at 78% accuracy versus 76% accuracy. And I've been arguing that there's a real hubris in thinking that most people in the United States, and let alone around the world in developing countries, have access to an annual mammogram that will then be looked at by the two best radiologists. And so I think accepting the cost-benefit analysis, understanding scaling and scarcity and the ability of access, I can say the same things about access to law, not just medicine. I think that's a very important issue that we're dealing with. The deans are thinking about, right? I see nods by the dean. I think it's very important to have that with us. This is a fallacy. Losses loom larger. The risk that, as a behavioral researcher, it's something that's been well documented, not just in relation to technology. In general, we have this kind of bias toward the status quo, and we feel the pain of what we're shifting to, the losses that we experience from a shift more than the gains. And what I want us to always think about, again, when we're thinking as policymakers, is about the cost of not using a technology when it's here, not just about the costs and risks and harms, potential harms when it is deployed. And again, that's lost in a lot of the conversations. We can think about a lot of examples there. The endowment effect is, sometimes called in the behavioral psychology research. Okay, this is one is controversial. Not that anything else that I said is not controversial, but there is I was just telling Professor Withis about this, that I think that when you look at the legal scholarship about AI and technology, it has been somewhat overtaken by privacy law scholars who were kind of quick to tell us, but there's a lot of data extraction, and also the policies themselves. The European GDPR has been very dominant and like having this is the way that we need to think about technology. We have to require data minimization, not sharing, because the big risk is the loss of privacy. It's surveillance capitalism, as you know, a scary terminology. And I like privacy as much as the next person. I care about privacy. I'm on the board of the Future of Privacy Forum, which is the largest think tank about privacy in the world. And what I do think that is lost here is that privacy is a right, but it oftentimes will be in tension with other rights, and we need to recognize that. We need to acknowledge it. As anybody who thinks about feminist legal scholarship knows, privacy is often not just a sword, but a shield, or vice versa, wherever perspective you're coming from. I've written quite a bit about non-disclosure agreements and how they have concealed centuries of discrimination and harassment and harms to women. But there's lots of other examples in which privacy actually protects the stronger parties. So we really need to be contextual and nuanced about what does it mean to minimize data collection. In healthcare, I document how there's been, again, centuries of studying the kind of dominant physicality in societies and excluding from clinical trials many other demographics. And I actually have been advocating using AI to correct a lot of skewed data and a lot of missing data and to count what matters. And I won't say a lot about copyright and bans, but similarly, this idea that we need stronger copyright protections for humans, so not to let the AI, like ChatGPT, gobble up training data. The assumption is that it protects people, but that's not, we need to challenge our own assumptions about who is benefiting from banning technology, for not introducing technology, from strengthening other kinds of rights. And I think this is related, but the final fallacy is that oftentimes we present this indictment to the technology itself about it not be ready for being on the roads, literally or figuratively, like giving up control of the wheel. We conflate the question of how good it is versus its disruption to the labor market specifically. I've seen this up close in California, where self-driving trucks are actually probably here also in Indiana. They are on the roads, on the highways. And in California, we just had a bill a few months ago that would have banned, it passed in the California legislature, it would have banned self-driving trucks. And Governor Newsom vetoed it. And I was supportive of the veto. And when you look at kind of the reasoning, it wasn't that these trucks were not safe. The empirics were there that they were safe on the road. It was the labor movement and the truckers guild that were very, rightfully so, worried about their jobs. Undeniably, they will be replaced. So what I want to say is that we need to care about that kind of disruption. Of course, we need to care about it very much. So a lot of my previous work has been about the gig economy and what to do with portable benefits and labor market mobility, as I said, and reskilling. But I want us to think about these questions separately and think about them together in terms of what are our goals as a society. And I think it's a very ripe moment to do that thinking about what do we expect from work, from an employment position, what is our social contract, what are our social welfare rights. but we shouldn't conflate that with whether the technology is safe and good. So all that, just kind of, this is a bit of a summary of that. I think that we need much more language to talk about all of this that we don't have. We have a lot of language about how there's a right to not having automation. So human in the loop. A lot of courts have been saying, like if on the some algorithmic systems that do things about make decisions about bail release or sentencing. Courts have been saying, well, as long as there's a human that's the final decision maker, then that's okay. So we have language about it reintroducing a human decision maker. We don't have language about when something is actually become safer or fairer, less biased. For example, if, I'm not saying that it's always going to be the case, but if empirically we are convinced that for a certain company, digitizing some of the decisions about performance will result in more equal outcomes across identity lines, we need language about how that's actually the standard that companies need to adopt. Similarly, we don't have language. We have a lot of language about, I said, data minimization and privacy and not surveilling and not extracting and not sharing. We don't have language about data collection rights. The right to be included, to be counted, to have fuller and more representative data sets should be part of our language. And again, in terms of rights, and again, closing the kind of loop of what I was just saying before, we need to rethink some of our social contracts of saying, we can have trustworthy AI and adopt it, but we also, of course, need to then think whether it continues to make sense that we're putting all our social welfare rights, our pensions and health care and reskilling and our worker comp and leave and all of that as part of this bargain of the industrial era of one workplace, full-time. This has been happening, the contingent work, part of our world has been happening well before generative AI has been introduced. But this is, of course, accelerating. And I mentioned that, well before I was writing about AI regulation, I actually have been saying, this is a historical, not accident, not arbitrary, because I think it's very political, that we've been kind of expecting so much from that model of one single employer from start to retirement. And so we need to do much more on that. It's political, but we should actually have a more robust language of separating those two from one another. So just an example of there's this billboard that's in the kind of gig platform happening, AI took my job to the next level. Yes, that's great. And I think that this is true in a lot of ways. We need to kind of think about that potential. But we also need to think what happens when it really takes our job. So again, these are separate questions, and we need to think about it in kind of orderly ways. And again, I keep saying it finally, but I'll just say a couple more things to link this up. We need competition, and this links up to previous research. We're at a really critical moment that we need to make sure that it's not, again, kind of the big tech, like OpenAI overtakes, all the sourced applications of generative AI, and we need a public option. So I actually think that the more we're open about a balanced conversation about the potential of AI and not just talking about all the fears, we actually will get to more skin in the game of everybody, and we can kind of have more competition and more public options. You've already seen that I think that we need to be, especially people in the legal field and lawmakers and policymakers need to not just examine what is trustworthy AI, but behaviorally, how can we educate people to trust the right kind of AI, not over adoration and not, over fear, and being risk averse. And then this is the final slide. I think we need to remember that there's lots of regulatory tools. So this is, again, it goes back to a lot of my early research when Ken just met me. I was thinking a lot about new governance and kind of the ways that public and private partnerships happen. This is a moment, again, that we need a lot of experimentation, a lot of industry input, a lot of standardization and rulemaking so we can sort out the snake oil from the really good, promising applications. And I worry that, and I think you got this from my talk, I worry that we're kind of starting at the top, which is not the natural way that we should think about regulation. That there's a lot of this kind of default ban, trucks, ban facial recognition, ban biometrics, ban algorithmic decision-making in employment interviews, which are laws that are actually, like Illinois has something like that. The GDPR has there are proposals before Congress on this. So thinking about the spectrum, fleshing it out, doing a lot of experimentation. And so, thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Wonderful to have an optimistic and forward-looking take on this. So I'd like to invite people to come with questions to come up to the standing mic. We are streaming this too, so that way people watching online can hear as well. And I need to announce that the CLE code is 10232 for those watching online. That's 10232. And those in person who are seeking to receive CLE, the sign-up sheet is now outside the door, so you can sign up as you leave. All right.
I'll take a question. Orly, I'm Asaf. Nice to meet you. Terrific presentation and really thought-provoking. There's two words you didn't say in the presentation. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts more about. Are they a fallacy, or is there a risk in them? One is privatization, and the other is cybersecurity. So for the first one, because a lot of the development of these tools is done through private companies who might have lesser restrictions on their ability to collect, assess, and use data, the risk is that we're, in doing that, not only decreasing our ability to protect privacy, but also that we're privatizing a lot of inherently governmental or sovereign functions. So that's a first concern. And then the other one is that automation requires datafication. And so we're datafying more aspects of our lives, and datafication entails hackability. And so there's a lot of concern about inviting more opportunities for vulnerabilities in every aspect of our lives, including in the workplace, in ways that we wouldn't have if we had not datafied that environment for the sake of automation.
Yeah. No, those are great questions and big, pervasive, large looming concerns. I think, it goes back to what I was describing on, how much competition we have, what are the new ways of achieving market power and dominance. It's something that Ken Bamberger, a different co-author, Ken Bamberger from Berkeley, and I have written about how data actually is collected, and antitrust is looking at that. In some ways, there's, with private-public collaboration and what you said, private companies taking on a lot of roles, there is some tension that we need to acknowledge also between market concentration and market, kind of going against what I just said. There are some benefits in concentration for some functions that traditionally were government functions, like national security, like anti-terrorism, that, we have these big actors in the private market that are collaborating with the public sector in some of these functions. So I think it is really true that is happening, that we need to think about different values and what we're trying to achieve there and know more. But of course, the other kind of big elephant in the room is that we're in a global race. So it goes back to what I was saying, that if we're not focusing on actually proactively as public governments developing and being in the game of having public options here in the West, then somebody else is going to do that. So we need to think about that very seriously. Very similarly with cybersecurity, and it is kind of under the umbrella for me on privacy. So again, actually this goes to, some of these, and I didn't talk about it now, but it is something that I'm right about, like red teaming and being proactive in finding the vulnerabilities. That's actually part of Biden's executive order, really kind of pushing for more of these red teaming, where you're constantly finding in advance where the cybersecurity leakages can happen.
Hi, I'm Jack. My background is more arts related, and like I did my undergrad degree in film, and me and a lot of the people I know are concerned about the extent to which a lot of these AI are built off of data sets that are taken without the creator's permission. So a lot of my friends do artwork professionally and are very concerned that their artwork is being pulled off the internet and given to an AI so that the AI can replicate it. And while I agree that AI is probably unstoppable at this point, if you want to have an ethical basis for it with AI helping society rather than hurting it, I feel like the way we've been doing it thus far hasn't been the way to go. And so.
Great. So I hear your worry and the pain of artists, and I alluded to this, like the Writers Guild in Hollywood and the Actors Guild. They were, the whole negotiation recently was about whether they would be replaced by generative AI, and of course artists are very worried. I know this. I want to take issue with that. It's a very active question right now in copyright scholarship of whether training a model for art with the history of art, everything that's available, including copyrighted materials, is copyright infringement or fair use, and what is it trained for? And I think that I'm in the camp where just like humans have always been inspired by everything out there, if an algorithm is inspired even more, like I as a human, have been to, I don't know, during my lifetime, like 200 museums, seen a lot of art, my little tiny algorithm here has, the computational things of, like, I'm inspired, right? That's art. We build on the shoulder of giants, and that's how art progresses. Then think about large language models. They can gobble up way more, and that's not copyright infringement if they're just like looking at lots and lots, like millions and millions of data points. But it also is true that it turns out, and this is the New York Times lawsuit right now, that sometimes they're not just inspired, they're really replicating or copying, and that's infringement. And so that's kind of a moment where there's the very active kind of thinking about, from the Copyright Office, from copyright scholars, like where to draw the lines, how to compensate, And then that's like a third question, other than the kind of the problem of replication, the problem of just training. A third question is, what if you, the artist, are actually using AI and doing something that's like symbiotic and with together? Is that copyrightable? So lots of questions. I think we still don't really have the answers, and the technology is moving a lot. But yes, I think we need to think about fairness.
Yeah, thanks for coming today. I'm about a third of the way through your book. I just started yesterday, but I have enjoyed it so
Just
far.
spread the word, share it.
Yeah, definitely. So I have a question about one of the particular policy recommendations that you mentioned tonight, and that is that the standards by which we should be evaluating these artificial intelligence mechanisms that are employed, particularly in regards to hiring decisions, that those should be evaluated quality-wise based on the impact among different identity groups. And so what I think my question kind of stems from, like, if we're going to use that standard as equality amongst different groups to audit these artificial intelligence systems, like, what purpose is the artificial intelligence system serving in the first place if we're just going to use that to kind of push almost a quota system? You know, I'd like to give you a chance to maybe clarify what you mean by that.
Yeah. So that's a tough question, what you're saying. So and since you've been reading the book, I didn't plant this question or anything, but I think you're alluding to some things about how I'm saying in the book that it's not realistic anymore to think about blinding and to monitor the inputs, which, as employment scholars know, the way that and everybody knows, the way that we've been doing anti-discrimination law for a long, long time has been to not take into account identity, right? Just do not discriminate, and not something that's more kind of positive of diversify. That's not the mandate that we have here in the United States. In fact, we've just been told by the Supreme Court that it's unlawful to take into account identities. And I go in the book to length to say, it's actually becoming impossible to blind an algorithm because of so many proxies that actually tell an algorithm can know your identity even if we blinded it in some ways. And so I say that maybe it's a moment where we have to shift the action from inputs to outputs and measuring diversity there or equality there. And then you run into that very, very tough question of whether, what does that mean? What does equality even mean? What does equity mean, and the gap between equality and equity? And whether we should dump everything on the technology to, like, always, it's another thing that I say in the book, that where it really, sometimes it's not that the data sets are skewed, it's that our society is just very unequal starting very early on, and AI is just kind of reflecting back to us and showing us the deep inequities, and we can't expect it to correct, all our social problems at that end point where we're sorting things. So these are really, really tough questions. This is not, I don't think I'm like caving or not responding if I say, like, you can't answer all these questions. I really think you can't answer all these questions by an AI policy. These are deep social questions, tensions and normative questions that democratic societies have always struggled with. The line, between equality and privacy, between safety and speech, all of these tensions are tensions that we've always had. And I want AI to help us answer these questions democratically, not to hinder us. And that's a great way to kind of end with a call to action.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Thank you.
That is a great way to end, and thank you so much for coming, Professor Lobel, and thank you all for being here. Thanks.
Thank
Good
you.
afternoon.